I never thought watching my family destroy itself would feel this satisfying until I realized I was the one holding the detonator. My name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm 34, and 3 days ago, I was sitting on a beach in Costa Rica, deliberately ignoring 47 frantic calls from home. My brother Jake's wedding had just imploded. My parents were in full panic mode, and according to the increasingly desperate voicemails, I was somehow the only person who could save our family from complete financial ruin. Here's what they didn't know. I'd been planning their downfall for 3 years. You see, when your own father tries to forge documents to steal your inheritance, when your brother helps him do it, and when loan sharks start circling your family like vultures, you have 2 choices. You can be the victim who gets devoured, or you can be the hunter who's been quietly setting traps. I chose option 3. I became the mastermind they never saw coming, the daughter they underestimated, and the woman who would teach them that blood might be thicker than water, but legal documents are thicker than both. Growing up in Denver, everyone always said the Mitchell family had it made. Dad built his construction company from nothing, turning weekend handyman jobs into the biggest residential contractor in 3 counties. Mom kept the books with military precision, and my brother Jake could frame a house before most kids learned to ride bikes. Then there was me, the daughter who chose marketing over manual labor, spreadsheets over sledgehammers. For years, that felt like my biggest family disappointment. Turns out, it was actually my greatest advantage. The skills that made me successful at my day job, analyzing data patterns, identifying market vulnerabilities, building strategic campaigns, those same abilities started screaming warnings when Dad began acting strange around financial conversations. When family dinners suddenly shifted from casual updates to carefully orchestrated presentations about business growth and investment opportunities, my professional instincts kicked in. Something was desperately wrong with Mitchell & Sons construction, and my parents were working overtime to hide it from me. What they didn't realize was that hiding financial problems from someone who builds marketing funnels for a living is like trying to conceal a house fire from a smoke detector. Understanding my family requires knowing that Mitchell & Sons wasn't just a business. It was Dad's legacy, his proof that a kid from the wrong side of Denver could build something lasting. Robert Mitchell started with a borrowed pickup truck and a toolbox inherited from his father, working 16-hour days to establish the reputation that would eventually employ half our neighborhood. Mom, Linda, became his business partner in every sense, handling contracts while pregnant with Jake, balancing ledgers while nursing me. Jake embodied everything Dad dreamed of in a successor. Athletic, charismatic, naturally gifted with tools, he could charm clients and swing hammers with equal skill. Watching them work together was like witnessing a perfectly choreographed dance. Dad would start explaining a technique, and Jake would finish the demonstration before the words left his mouth. Their bond went deeper than father and son. They were craftsmen connected by shared purpose. My relationship with both parents carried different weight. While they respected my education and career success, there was always an unspoken question hanging in family conversations. When would their college-educated daughter apply her talents to the family enterprise? Mom would beam with pride when colleagues praised my marketing campaigns, yet her eyes held subtle disappointment that those skills weren't building Mitchell legacy. The irony cuts deep now. Their greatest pride in my professional abilities became the very weapon they never saw coming. Every strategic thinking course, every data analysis workshop, every client presentation that taught me to read between lines and identify hidden motivations was preparing me for the most important investigation of my life. Dad always said the Mitchell family took care of its own. He just never specified what happened when your own family stops taking care of you. Madison Wells entered our family orbit like a perfectly polished storm. 29, finance degree from CU Boulder, and a smile that could sell ice to Eskimos, she was everything Jake thought he wanted. Her family owned 3 car dealerships across Colorado, which explained the designer handbags and casual mentions of ski trips to Aspen. When she extended her left hand across Mom's dining table that Thanksgiving, the engagement ring caught the chandelier light like a miniature disco ball. $50,000, Madison announced with practiced nonchalance, as if discussing the weather. Jake insisted on something that matched my personality. The silence stretched uncomfortably. Dad cleared his throat, Mom busied herself with cranberry sauce, and Jake's face flushed the color of our autumn centerpiece. Meanwhile, my brain was calculating mortgage payments, truck maintenance costs, and employee salaries against the sparkling monument to excess sitting 3 feet away. "That's quite an investment," came out of my mouth before wisdom could intervene, especially with construction slowing down in winter months. Madison's smile never wavered, but her eyes sharpened. Family businesses are so unpredictable, aren't they? Good thing Jake and I believe in living for today. That comment landed like a slap. Living for today with whose money? The tension that followed would split our family down the middle, though none of us understood we were choosing sides in a war that had already begun. The first crack appeared during Christmas dinner, 2 months after the engagement ring incident. Dad excused himself 3 times to take urgent business calls, each conversation conducted in hushed tones behind the closed office door. Mitchell and Sons had never operated during holidays. Dad's sacred rule about family time had been unbreakable for 23 years. Yet there he was, apologizing to mystery callers about payment schedules and extension requests. Mom's behavior shifted too, though more subtly. The woman who once balanced company books with mathematical precision began avoiding financial conversations entirely. When Jake mentioned needing a company truck repair, she'd redirect to wedding planning topics. When Dad discussed upcoming projects, she'd suddenly remember urgent kitchen tasks. The family matriarch who once managed every dollar with surgical accuracy had become financially invisible. Jake's transformation was the most disturbing. My confident, capable brother started asking oddly specific questions about inheritance laws during casual conversations. Hypothetically, he'd begin, if someone needed to access trust fund money early, how would that work? His inquiries felt calculated rather than curious, accompanied by nervous energy that never used to exist around family discussions. Documents began disappearing from Dad's home office. Papers that had lived in the same filing cabinet for years. Bank statements, insurance policies, and legal documents that Mom used to review monthly suddenly became temporarily misplaced. When questioned, Dad would laugh off concerns about organization, claiming retirement plans required restructuring old paperwork. The most chilling warning sign came disguised as family generosity. Dad started insisting on paying for everything, dinners, gas money, even my grocery bills, with credit cards instead of his usual cash habits. Each transaction felt like performance art, theatrical gestures designed to prove abundance, while his hands shook slightly during every signature. Professional instincts screamed danger signals that personal emotions wanted to ignore. The man who taught me to balance checkbooks was exhibiting classic signs of financial distress. Defensive behavior around money topics, document secrecy, credit dependency, and family members asking inheritance questions. 3 years ago, standing in that kitchen watching Dad fumble another urgent business call while Mom pretended everything was normal, the horrible truth crystallized. Mitchell and Sons wasn't just struggling, it was dying. And somehow, my trust fund had become their life support system. That realization launched the most important investigation of my life. 3 years of investigation had yielded devastating evidence, but family love kept hope alive that somehow the truth would surface naturally. Maybe Dad would seek help for what appeared to be gambling problems. Perhaps Jake would confide his obvious distress instead of skulking around legal questions. The optimistic part of my heart believed family bonds would triumph over whatever darkness was consuming Mitchell and Sons. That faith shattered at 9:17 p.m. on a Tuesday night, delivered through the cold efficiency of a text message. Sarah, after much consideration, Madison and I have decided you shouldn't attend our wedding. She's still uncomfortable about Thanksgiving, and we want our day to be drama-free. Hope you understand. Jake. The words blurred through sudden tears. Drama-free? 28 years of sibling devotion reduced to drama because of one honest question about financial responsibility? The brother who used to sneak into my room during thunderstorms, who taught me to throw a baseball, who defended me against middle school bullies, had just uninvited me from the most important day of his life. Phone calls to Mom and Dad confirmed the united front. Sometimes families need space to heal, Mom explained with rehearsed gentleness. Maybe this break will help everyone gain perspective. Dad's conversation carried similar themes, though his voice trembled with what sounded suspiciously like guilt. Their coordinated responses felt scripted, practiced, like they'd anticipated this conversation and prepared talking points. The realization hit with brutal clarity. This wasn't about Madison's hurt feelings or family healing. This was strategic isolation, removing the one person whose questions threatened their carefully constructed facade. Jake's wedding was scheduled for 3 weeks away. Whatever they planned to do with my trust fund, whatever scheme required my absence, the timeline was accelerating rapidly. The exclusion wasn't punishment. It was the final phase of an operation that had been years in the making. Costa Rica suddenly seemed like the perfect strategic retreat. Paradise lasted exactly 72 hours. Costa Rica's Manuel Antonio Beach had provided the perfect sanctuary: white sand, emerald water, and blissful silence from family chaos brewing 6,000 miles away. The resort's infinity pool overlooked the Pacific, where howler monkeys provided morning entertainment and sunset cocktails erased 3 years of investigative stress. For 3 glorious days, the Mitchell family drama felt like someone else's nightmare. Then my phone exploded back to life. 47 missed calls, 36 voicemails, 83 text messages. The notification sounds created a symphony of panic that shattered tropical tranquility like breaking glass. Jake's name dominated the call log with increasing desperation. Missed call at 6 a.m., 6:15, 6:30, then every 10 minutes until the battery died from exhaustion. The first voicemail started calm. "Sarah, call me back when you get this. We need to talk." By message 15, Jake's voice cracked with barely controlled hysteria. "Please, please call me back. Everything's falling apart. The wedding's off. Madison left. Dad's, just call me back." Text messages painted an increasingly chaotic picture. Mom's usually composed messages devolved into fragments. Wedding canceled. Madison gone. Family emergency. Need you home now. Dad hadn't sent a single message, which somehow felt more ominous than Jake's desperation or Mom's abbreviated panic. The final voicemail, recorded just 2 hours earlier, contained Jake's complete breakdown. His voice trembled through tears, words tumbling over each other in panicked confession. She knew, Sarah. Madison knew everything. Someone gave her documents, bank statements, everything about the company. She called off the wedding right there at the altar, in front of everyone. Said she couldn't marry into a family built on lies. Static filled the pause before Jake's voice returned, barely above a whisper. Dad's locked himself in the office. Mom won't stop crying. The business is finished. And somehow this is all connected to your trust fund. Everyone's asking where you are, but nobody knows what to do without you here. The irony cut deep. 3 years of being marginalized, excluded, and dismissed as the dramatic daughter, yet when crisis erupted, every family member instinctively reached for the person they'd spent months pushing away. Their desperation revealed what pride had hidden. Despite all their attempts at independence, when Mitchell family foundations crumbled, they still needed their strategic daughter to rebuild. Paradise suddenly felt like a prison. While tropical birds sang outside my window, the most important battle of my life was being fought without me. Every instinct screamed to book the next flight home, but strategic thinking demanded pause. Whatever Madison had discovered, whoever had fed her that information, the timing wasn't coincidental. Someone else was pulling strings in this elaborate disaster, and they wanted me exactly where Jake now desperately needed me to be. The phone call with Jake lasted 3 hours, each revelation more devastating than the last. Through tears and broken sentences, my brother painted a picture of systematic financial destruction that made my worst suspicions seem optimistic. Mitchell & Sons hadn't just been struggling. It had been hemorrhaging money for 24 months, bleeding cash through a combination of Dad's gambling addiction and what Jake described as obligations to some very dangerous people. Robert Mitchell, the man who taught me to balance checkbooks and never spend money we didn't have, had been living a double life that would make a spy novelist proud. 3-hour business meetings were actually poker games in backroom casinos across Denver. Weekend fishing trips with old friends were covers for traveling to Colorado's mountain casinos, where Dad systematically lost everything he'd built over 30 years. The numbers Jake recited made my stomach turn. $60,000 in business account withdrawals disguised as equipment purchases, $45,000 in fake vendor payments that traced back to gambling debts, $18,000 charged to company credit cards at casinos from Black Hawk to Central City. Mom's meticulous bookkeeping had been compromised for months. Dad had been intercepting bank statements and altering financial documents before she could review them. But the gambling was only half the nightmare. When casino losses exceeded available cash, Dad had borrowed from loan sharks operating throughout Colorado's construction industry. These weren't Hollywood caricatures with pinstripe suits and brass knuckles. They were legitimate businessmen who provided bridge loans to contractors facing cash flow problems, charging interest rates that would make credit card companies blush. Jake's voice broke completely when describing the escalating threats. Phone calls at midnight demanding payment updates. Strangers appearing at job sites asking pointed questions about company assets. Veiled references to what happened to contractors who couldn't honor their obligations. The wedding had become Dad's desperate deadline, a public event where loan sharks expected to see evidence of the Mitchell family's continued prosperity. My trust fund had emerged as their salvation plan sometime during the past 6 months. Jake explained how Dad had been researching early withdrawal penalties, exploring legal loopholes for accessing funds before my 35th birthday. The $300,000 inheritance from Grandpa Mitchell wasn't just Sarah's future security. It represented immediate salvation for a family drowning in debts they couldn't repay. The forgery operation was sophisticated enough to fool casual inspection. Dad had been creating false bank statements showing trust fund withdrawals, fake legal documents authorizing fund transfers, and fraudulent investment reports suggesting profitable reinvestment opportunities. Mom's signatures had been practiced and perfected, Jake's cooperation secured through desperate emotional manipulation about saving the family business. Madison's discovery of the truth had been accidental but thorough. While helping with wedding planning, she'd stumbled across legitimate bank statements in Dad's home office, documents that contradicted everything she'd been told about family finances. Her finance background enabled quick recognition of the discrepancies, and her investigation had revealed the full scope of gambling debts, forged documents, and planned trust fund theft. The forgery operation was sophisticated enough to fool casual inspection. Dad had been creating false bank statements showing trust fund withdrawals, fake legal documents authorizing fund transfers, and fraudulent investment reports suggesting profitable reinvestment opportunities. Mom's signatures had been practiced and perfected, Jake's cooperation secured through desperate emotional manipulation about saving the family business. Madison's discovery of the truth had been accidental but thorough. While helping with wedding planning, she'd stumbled across legitimate bank statements in Dad's home office, documents that contradicted everything she'd been told about family finances. Her finance background enabled quick recognition of the discrepancies, and her investigation had revealed the full scope of gambling debts, forged documents, and planned trust fund theft. The wedding collapse had been swift and brutal. Madison confronted Jake at the altar, demanding immediate explanation for financial deceptions. When he couldn't provide satisfactory answers, she announced to 200 wedding guests that she couldn't marry someone whose family had been lying about their financial situation. The public humiliation was complete. Vendors demanding immediate payment, guests whispering about family scandals, and Dad disappearing into his office while Mom handled damage control. Jake's final confession chilled my blood more than anything else. The loan sharks weren't just threatening financial consequences anymore. They were making increasingly specific references to what happened to family members when debts remained unpaid. Madison's departure had eliminated their public show of prosperity, accelerating payment demands to immediate and non-negotiable. "They know about your trust fund," Jake whispered through the phone. "Dad told them it was accessible, that the wedding money would prove we could honor our obligations. Now they want that money within 72 hours, or they start collecting interest through other methods." The implications hit like ice water. My exclusion from the wedding hadn't been about Madison's hurt feelings. It had been about removing the one person who might interfere with a desperate plan to access money that legally belonged to me. 3,000 miles away, my family was trapped between bankruptcy and physical danger, using my inheritance as collateral for their survival. Jake's second call came at 3 a.m, Costa Rica time, his voice barely recognizable through panic and exhaustion. The loan sharks had visited the family home 6 hours after the wedding disaster, not as thugs making threats, but as businessmen conducting what they called a financial wellness check. 2 men in expensive suits had sat in Mom's living room, drinking her coffee while calmly explaining how quickly construction accidents could happen when contractors failed to honor agreements. The visit's psychological warfare was masterful. Rather than explicit threats, they'd discussed recent incidents throughout Colorado's construction industry: a framing accident in Boulder that hospitalized 3 workers, equipment sabotage in Fort Collins that bankrupted a small contractor, and a house fire in Thornton that destroyed both property and reputation. Each story was delivered with professional sympathy, as if discussing unfortunate weather patterns rather than calculated destruction. Dad's complete emotional collapse had begun during this meeting. The man who'd built Mitchell & Sons through sheer determination had crumbled when faced with consequences of his secret addiction. Mom found him later that evening, sobbing in his workshop among tools that might soon be seized as collateral. 28 years of marriage hadn't prepared her for discovering that her husband's gambling problem had evolved into associations with criminal organizations. But the loan sharks weren't the story's most chilling element. That distinction belonged to their information source. These men knew intimate details about family finances that extended far beyond Dad's gambling debts. They'd referenced my trust fund by specific dollar amounts, mentioned my marketing career by company name, and even knew about my Costa Rica vacation. Someone had been feeding them intelligence about the Mitchell family for months, mapping our assets with forensic precision. The revelation that shattered Jake's remaining composure came through investigating Madison's mysterious information source. Desperate to understand how his fiancée had obtained damaging financial documents, he'd called her college roommate seeking answers. That conversation revealed Madison hadn't been conducting solo detective work. She'd been collaborating with someone who'd been monitoring our family's financial situation for years. Patricia Wong's name emerged like a puzzle piece that suddenly made the entire picture clear. My mentor, my trusted advisor, the forensic accountant who'd guided my professional development for 15 years, had been conducting her own investigation into Mitchell & Sons. Jake's frantic research revealed that Patricia had been systematically documenting Dad's gambling activities, tracing loan shark connections, and building a comprehensive case file that she'd eventually shared with Madison. The betrayal cut deeper than family deception. Patricia had watched me struggle with suspicions about Dad's behavior, had listened to my concerns about disappearing documents and strange financial conversations, yet never revealed she'd been conducting parallel investigations. Every professional lunch where she'd encouraged my analytical instincts, every conversation where she'd praised my detective skills, had been carefully orchestrated guidance towards discoveries she'd already made. Jake's voice broke completely when explaining Patricia's true motivations. The loan sharks hadn't just been targeting Dad. They'd been investigating the entire Mitchell family's financial resources, including my trust fund. Patricia's intervention had been designed to protect me from becoming collateral damage in Dad's gambling debts, but her methods had destroyed family relationships while potentially exposing us to greater danger. The timeline's acceleration was no coincidence. Patricia had orchestrated Madison's discovery precisely 3 days into my Costa Rica vacation, ensuring the wedding would collapse while putting me safely beyond immediate reach. Someone had been playing chess while the rest of us stumbled through checkers, manipulating events to force a confrontation that would expose all family secrets simultaneously. The most terrifying realization was that Patricia's protection might have backfired catastrophically. By exposing Dad's deception without providing alternative solutions, she'd potentially accelerated the loan sharks' timeline while eliminating their patience for elaborate repayment schemes. My family was trapped in a nightmare where allies had become enemies, protectors had become manipulators, and survival depended on money that legally belonged to me but was practically inaccessible from 6,000 miles away. Patricia's phone call interrupted my desperate attempts to book emergency flights home, her familiar voice carrying an authority that immediately commanded attention. "Don't come back yet," she said without preamble. "Everything that's happening was designed to protect you, but returning now would undo 3 years of careful planning." The conversation that followed shattered every assumption about the past week's chaos. Patricia hadn't been conducting unauthorized surveillance of my family. She'd been building a legal case against the loan shark operation that had ensnared Dad and dozens of other Colorado contractors. Her forensic accounting work had uncovered a sophisticated criminal network using gambling addiction as recruitment tools, targeting successful small business owners with assets worth liquidating. Mitchell & Sons had been marked from the moment Dad placed his first casino bet 18 months ago. The loan sharks operated like talent scouts, identifying vulnerable business owners through casino surveillance, then systematically destroying their financial stability while mapping family assets. My trust fund had appeared on their radar 6 months into Dad's gambling spiral, when desperate research into early withdrawal options had triggered banking algorithms designed to detect inheritance fraud. The elaborate wedding timeline hadn't been coincidence. Criminal organizations prefer high-pressure situations where victims made desperate decisions without legal consultation. Patricia's intervention through Madison had been surgical strike designed to collapse their scheme before trust fund theft became irreversible. The public wedding disaster served dual purposes: humiliating Dad into recognizing his situation's severity while demonstrating to loan sharks that family financial resources weren't as accessible as promised. Patricia's revelation about my own investigation sent chills down my spine. Every document discovery, every financial irregularity that had triggered my suspicions had been carefully orchestrated breadcrumbs leading toward this moment. She'd been guiding my detective instincts while building parallel evidence, ensuring that when family confrontation became inevitable, multiple sources would corroborate the same devastating truth. The legal framework she'd constructed was breathtakingly comprehensive. Federal banking authorities were already investigating the loan shark network through construction industry task forces. Colorado's Attorney General had been building RICO cases against organized crime infiltration of legitimate businesses. Dad's gambling debts were documented evidence in criminal proceedings that would eventually protect him as victim rather than prosecute him as willing participant. Most importantly, my trust fund had been legally secured through mechanisms Patricia had implemented months ago. Emergency protective orders prevented any access without my physical presence and biometric verification. The money these criminals thought they could steal was effectively frozen beyond their reach, regardless of whatever threats or documents Dad might produce under duress. "Your family is safe," Patricia assured me, her voice carrying professional certainty. "The loan sharks are about to discover they've invested months manipulating a family whose primary asset is completely inaccessible. That realization will shift their attention toward cutting losses rather than escalating threats." The most shocking revelation came last. Patricia had been working directly with federal law enforcement for 8 months, using Dad's case as foundation for dismantling criminal operations throughout Colorado's construction industry. Everything, the wedding collapse, Madison's investigation, even my Costa Rica exile, had been strategy designed to trigger the controlled detonation of a criminal conspiracy that threatened dozens of families beyond just the Mitchells. 24 hours later, armed with Patricia's legal framework and my own 3-year investigation, the flight home felt less like rescue mission and more like strategic deployment. The comprehensive solution we developed wasn't just about saving Mitchell and Sons. It was about transforming family dysfunction into sustainable recovery while protecting other contractors from similar criminal exploitation. Grandpa Mitchell's trust fund revelation had been Patricia's masterstroke of legal research. The inheritance wasn't $300,000 as everyone believed, but $2 million with activation clauses designed to protect against exactly this scenario. Grandpa's Depression-era paranoia about family financial security had created legal mechanisms that prevented access during crisis situations, ensuring inheritance money couldn't be stolen during emergencies or used to enable destructive behaviors. The early activation process Patricia had discovered required federal court approval, extensive addiction counseling documentation, and professional business oversight, safeguards that would take months to complete. However, she'd also found emergency provisions allowing immediate access if funds were being used to assist federal law enforcement in criminal investigations. Dad's cooperation with the loan shark investigation qualified Mitchell and Sons for immediate financial relief through victim assistance programs. Landing in Denver with legal documents authorizing trust fund access felt like returning as conquering general rather than worried daughter. The money would save the family business, but only under strict conditions. Dad would enter intensive gambling addiction treatment, Mom would assume primary business management with professional oversight, and Jake would work under probationary supervision while rebuilding trust through demonstrated responsibility. The business restructuring plan went far beyond family therapy. Mitchell and Sons would become a model for small business recovery from criminal exploitation, working with federal authorities to identify and assist other contractors trapped in similar situations. Dad's expertise would be channeled toward educating business owners about recognizing financial manipulation, transforming his shame into protective knowledge for Colorado's construction community. Most importantly, the family meeting scheduled for that evening would reveal that everyone's desperation had been unnecessary. Patricia's legal maneuvering had already neutralized the loan shark threats through federal intervention. The criminals who'd terrorized my family were under surveillance, their operations disrupted, and their ability to collect debts severely compromised by ongoing investigations. Jake's surprise at my early return would pale compared to his shock at discovering that his strategic sister had been 3 steps ahead throughout the entire crisis. The woman they'd excluded from family decisions had been orchestrating family salvation, using professional skills and trusted alliances to solve problems they hadn't even recognized. Walking into that house would mark the moment when family power dynamics shifted permanently. No longer would financial decisions be made in secret, family members excluded from important conversations, or trust fund security taken for granted. Dad would learn that his daughter's forgiveness came with non-negotiable conditions. Mom would discover that business management required transparency and accountability. And Jake would understand that earning back sister's trust meant demonstrating genuine change rather than desperate promises. The Mitchell family was about to be reborn under new leadership, with their formerly marginalized daughter holding all the cards. The family meeting unfolded with surgical precision, each revelation carefully timed for maximum impact. Dad's face transformed from relief to bewilderment to profound shame as the scope of my preparation became clear. When federal agents arrived to discuss his cooperation in the broader investigation, the man who'd been drowning in helpless desperation suddenly understood that survival meant complete transparency and professional accountability. Mom's reactions surprised everyone, including herself. Years of enabling Dad's secrecy dissolved into fierce, protective determination once she grasped how close the family had come to losing everything. Her business acumen, suppressed during months of financial deception, re-emerged with laser focus on implementing the oversight systems that would prevent future manipulation. Within hours, she'd transformed from anxious enabler to strategic partner in family recovery. Jake's humiliation at discovering his sister's superior strategic planning gradually evolved into grudging respect, then genuine gratitude. The brother who'd helped exclude me from family decisions now faced the reality that those same decisions had nearly destroyed everything he'd hoped to inherit. His cooperation with the 2-year supervision plan wasn't just a legal requirement. It was recognition that earning back trust meant accepting diminished authority until responsibility could be demonstrated. The most unexpected twist came with Madison's return 3 days later. Her breakup with Jake hadn't been about money. It had been about integrity and family dysfunction. With the truth exposed and recovery plans in motion, she cautiously explored whether the man she'd loved still existed beneath layers of desperation and deception. Her finance background made her invaluable for business modernization, but her emotional investment in Jake's character provided motivation for long-term healing. Federal authorities' successful dismantling of the loan shark network vindicated Patricia's elaborate strategy. 14 contractors across Colorado were freed from criminal debt obligations. 37 gambling addiction cases received professional intervention, and a criminal organization that had terrorized small business owners for 3 years faced federal prosecution. Justice arrived not through revenge, but through systematic transformation of dysfunction into strength, criminal exploitation into federal protection, and family shame into community service. 6 months later, Mitchell & Sons had become Colorado's poster child for family business recovery, featured in construction industry publications and federal victim assistance programs. Dad's transformation from gambling addict to addiction counselor brought healing that extended far beyond our family, helping dozens of contractors recognize and escape similar traps. His speaking engagements at business conferences carried the authenticity that only comes from personal devastation and genuine recovery. The book project emerged naturally from documenting our journey. Breaking the Cycle, How one family escaped financial manipulation would become essential reading for small business owners, combining practical financial protection strategies with emotional guidance for families facing crisis. Publishers were already interested, recognizing the growing need for resources addressing criminal exploitation of legitimate businesses. Most remarkably, family relationships had evolved beyond their original dysfunction into something healthier and more honest. Sunday dinners now included open financial discussions, business decisions involved all stakeholders, and trust was rebuilt through demonstrated accountability rather than blind faith. Jake had earned his way back into leadership through consistent responsibility and genuine change. The greatest gift was realizing that strategic thinking and family love weren't mutually exclusive. Protecting yourself didn't require abandoning people you cared about. It required establishing boundaries that enabled sustainable relationships. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for family is refuse to enable their destruction while providing pathways toward recovery. If you've ever felt torn between family loyalty and self-protection, know that you can choose both. Subscribe for more stories about taking control when the people you love try to take advantage, because everyone deserves relationships built on respect rather than exploitation.